Okay, we'll go ahead and get settled and get started from the break. We have one point of clarification that Joan would like to make about her presentation.
Actually, I wanted to ask Carolyn to do this for me. Carolyn is the acting Deputy Division Chief in Reno. Words are important, and I wanted you to clarify about the Palomino Valley Center, which Carolyn right now supervises. Thank you.
When Joan spoke about the difference between our reporting numbers and our wild horse and burro program system and what we pay to the rendering plant for picking up animals that died on the facility, we account for all horses that come off the range, whether marked or unmarked. It's the unmarked stillborn foals and very young foals that were born on facility that currently are not reported in our system, and we do, as Joan pointed out, we do have plans to improve that reporting so that those numbers match. So that was the clarification.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Dean, I see you stepping up, but on the program we have the BLM informed working groups coming up next with Sally next. Is that correct?
Oh, that's true.
I did.
You're just so anxious.
You have to contain your enthusiasm, Dean.
I think Dean is used to doing a lot of the presenting, so he doesn't quite know what to do. But anyway, if everybody's ready, I'll go ahead and get started. At the October Advisory Board meeting, I discussed an array of ideas that the increasing adoption team had discussed. And this is a team that's made up of BLM folks and then Julie Gleason and June Suing. So there are external experts, the two board members. And the team has continued to meet, and one of our realizations was that we would be more effective if we could initially focus on a few ideas and build from there. Because what we were doing, we were looking at so many various things that it's impossible to even know where to get started. So we started honing in on some of the key topics and the key things that we felt were of the most importance. And one of the issues is that we're not very effective at getting horses to the Northeast for trainers and adopters. The closest BLM facility really is in Elm Creek, Nebraska. We have a facility in the eastern states, and that's in Jackson, Mississippi. So Elm Creek is the closest to the Northeast. And so some of the things that we were thinking that could help with the situation would be to send out a request for proposal for small haulers to move smaller loads of horses. And then these horses could be sent to a location with a trainer or a tip trainer that had the ability to hold the horses and to make them available for pickup from adopters or from other trainers. And this kind of falls along the milk run proposal that Tim Harvey had come up with. So we think this is something that has a lot of merit and that we need to do. Something else we had looked at was to work with the BLM Eastern States office to determine if a selection of wild horses could be kept at the BLM Meadowwood property in Lorton, Virginia. Because Lorton, Virginia, we've been using that location for pickups for some of the makeover events in New Jersey, and that seems to work well. And it's a lot closer than Nebraska. So yeah. that's one thing we can look at. Just a little bit. Absolutely. Anyway, another issue that we found is that we have trained wild horses at the Wyoming Honor Farm in Riverton, Wyoming, that are not getting adopted. And you know, you heard about Hutchinson, and we know Canyon City and a lot of our other prisons. They have a demand for horses, but Riverton's kind of located in the middle of nowhere. And so one of the things that we thought we could do to help get those animals adopted would be to put together a load of trained horses from the Honor Farm, and they would be led onto trainers or onto the trailers instead of just being put on. So they'd be trained horses, and they'd be sent to an adoption event in the East. And we've already started coordinating that with the Milwaukee office. So that should be coming to a location this summer. One of the other things that we looked at using incentives for adopters. And one incentive that is currently in use here in the New Mexico region is an incentive where the adopter of a 4-year-old or older horse can receive $500 once the animal is titled. The New Mexico region brings around 8 eligible animals to each adoption event, and this has been very successful at getting those animals adopted and titled. And so we thought that we could see if we can expand that to other offices. Also, something that we need to look into is to see if there's a way to give an incentive, an opportunity for incentives that could be a tax credit for people who adopt. We still need to do the cost-benefit analysis to show the benefits for this, but this is something that we really do want to look into. Something else that we found that we thought we could focus on right now is that we continue to get a lot of calls from individuals in other countries that are interested in adopting a horse. They want to have a part of the American West with them. And we have had a couple of successful overseas adoptions. And so what we found was that the folks that adopted the horses, they found a trainer here in the United States where the horse could be kept for a year and also could receive the training. The horse was then gentled, and the adopter made out all the arrangements with the trainer. And then when the title was passed to the adopter, the trainer helped the adopter ship the horse over to their country. So what we thought we could do is to see if there's an opportunity for the BLM to put together a list of trainers who are willing to take care of and to provide training for a horse for a 1-year time period. Some trainers aren't able to do that, but we could see if we can pull together a list. And then also to see if they would be able to assist the adopters with getting the animals shipped. So they'd have to know, the shipping regulations and vaccinations and everything involved in that. And so we were going to put notices up on Facebook and the website and in press releases. And then once we get a list of trainers who are willing to do this and able, we would provide this list to individuals from other countries when they contact us about being interested in adopting. And then we would let the trainer and the adopter work out their own fee schedules and all the other details of the arrangement. So we thought this could be a quick fix for helping people who are interested in getting one horse and helping to get it adopted and to share this with other countries. And we also thought this arrangement could be made with possibly with some of the younger cell-eligible animals. And this would, because the animals are still going to have to be trained if they're going to be shipped overseas just because of the logistics and all of that. And so the training period could be shorter, but the concept could be the same. Something else that we looked at was the need to increase our grassroots communication and public awareness. And so we need to increase the use of local electronic updates to individuals about adoption events and trail rides and other opportunities for adopters to get together. And there's a couple of states that have been doing a good job of that. We have Crystal in Las Vegas who puts together a little email update to her mailing list that says, hey, here's what's going on this next month around the area. You can adopt, or you can get together, or we're going to do a cleanup on a herd management area. So it's a variety of things that can be done. Our office in Oregon also does that, of upcoming events, and Idaho just started doing a quarterly newspaper that's pretty good. So we need to expand their markets and their audiences so that they can get out the local word about that. And then another thing that we need to do is we need to encourage the BLM facilities to promote each other. So if somebody calls up Palomino Valley and says, oh, I'm interested in this horse or this type of horse, and they say, well, we don't have any trained horses or any horses available right now, or a horse that looks like that right now, that there we would have enough of a communication so that they'd say, well, we don't have one, but Pauls Valley does, or Litchfield does, or here's where you can get what you're looking for, because we really should be able to meet just about every need for every kind of horse available.
Yeah.
We have enough of them,
You got a selection to choose from.
Exactly. And then another thing that we felt we could do right now is just to encourage our Facebook friends to promote our adoption events and to promote different things that people are doing. So to get more involved in the actual adoptions and the grassroots level of what's going on. Because one thing we found is the best advertisement for a Mustang is if you go to an event and you're riding your horse, and this is for BLM personnel and for other adopters, and you're riding your horse, and people want to find out, hey, tell me about this horse. You know, it's the best mark there is, so this is just a way to get more of the grassroots advertising going. So those are some of the things that we feel we can do in a quick time period. Any questions from the board?
Sally, as you were mentioning, you know, international movement of horses and adopters taking them, you know, after years training and having been titled. You know, that really is interesting to me, and in the past, I know there have been concerns of sending any large number of horses overseas, that what would happen to them over, you know, once they leave the U.S. And it strikes a tone with me because I was just at the equine practitioners meeting in December, and there was a presentation there that we're talking about veterinarians volunteering and going down to the Dominican Republic. And horses and burros are an absolute essential part of their culture, of their work, in agricultural work in the rural areas, and the need that they have for, you know, quality horses, you know, healthy horses, because they, you know, they just don't have the population necessary to fill their needs. And it just seems to me like, you know, it's a tragedy that we're not able to fill two needs, you know, or promote that in some, you know, logical and humane manner, that we could get horses to parts of the world that really, and if it's through this individual adoption, trained in the U.S., which was probably a good thing before they're sent across overseas. Maybe we should be looking at organizations, you know, humane organizations or welfare organizations, you know, that work overseas to work in concert and maybe even fund getting the horses over there for situations like that. And I think there's a real potential there, and there's, I think, you know, on a moral basis, I think it's something that we haven't plenty of. We have that excess in numbers, and we have areas in the world that really have the need. So I realize, you know, in the past we've talked about it's too expensive to get it there, but should we be talking to NGOs and other organizations that may want to help fund that potential?
That's a very, very good idea, yeah, because the adoptions that we are talking about were more where one adopter is interested in one horse, and they're able to pay the, you know, $5,000 or $6,000 to ship the horse overseas and all the training and all of that, so.
Well, you know, I got a interesting perspective on it. I've spent, you know, I lived overseas for a number of years, and I lived in areas like the Dominican Republic and places, you know, Central America, all through there, where the horses are used on a regular basis to get things done. Their transportation, and it's where I fell in love with Spanish horses, was down there. But you know, one of the things that I'm wondering about is whether the Mustang Heritage Foundation would be interested in developing a foreign tip trainer program. There is a very active, you know, Western competition type stuff going on in Europe. I sell an awful lot of my stirrups that we make to Europe. We ship to there all the time. And a lot of those folks, because of the discourse that I have with them, know that I'm involved with the Mustangs, and I have heard countless times where they wish they could get an American Mustang. You know, it would be, it's like, you know, in Japan, a Harley Davidson is a status symbol. And I think in Europe, a Mustang could become a status symbol as well. And I think if it was something set up like through a tip program or something like that, where you've got somebody who's vested in protecting where the horses are going to be going, that has an emotional commitment to the quality of care for these horses as far as where they're going to end up, would be an invaluable tool for that. And I think that it's a resource that you may want to talk to. I don't know if the Mustang Heritage Foundation is even remotely interested in something like that, but it would seem like it would be a really cool extension of what they can provide. And, you know, imagine having something like that overseas, and if you had, then you would have a shipping point, you would have, you know, all of that stuff could be set up there and let somebody else do it, so you don't have to do it.
That's a good idea.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let somebody who's vested and interested in doing it set it up and do the groundwork and run with it. Makes a lot of sense to me.
It does make sense. We will talk with our friends at the foundation and see if
There
this
you
is
go.
something, or see if there's other things we can figure out. I like it.
You know, I think there are other NGOs out there that do a lot of, you know,
Yeah.
spend money overseas and other types of projects. This might be something that could fit into that, you know, those types of efforts. So, any other questions?
I just want to add, I think in our discussions, we talked about how a trained horse is more marketable and has more value than an untrained animal. And some of the adoption numbers here, state that. I mean, the ones where the untrained animals are being sent to an adoption, the percentage is coming back at 36% adopted, 10% adopted. I mean, in my mind, those grades are not good. You know, if those were my kids, they would be flunking out of school. But you look at the TIP programs with Mustang Heritage Foundation, you look at the inmate correctional facility programs, you know, they're in the A range, 97%, 100%. So I think that's an important point. The trained horse will go in, has a better opportunity to go into a great caring home because they're more usable. People can be more engaged with them right away. So I just wanted to point that out, that it was a focus of our group too, is trying to get more trained horses out there.
Right, thanks.
Yeah, and one other thing is right in line with that, you know, I've got one of the things that I think would be really critical component in the BLM adoption program is an assessment of horses before they're sent out to an adoption. So basically, horses that are being offered for adoption should be assessed by a horseman or horsewoman. Actually, I think horsewomen, for the most part, do a better job, but that's neither here nor there. I think that an assessment of the horse, so that the horses that are going out are really good candidates for training. You know, I think a lot of the recidivism rate is a reflection of people that really don't have very good skill sets on training a horse, that then get a horse that's a difficult or a really challenged to train, and then that's a recipe for, it's a train wreck. And so the horse doesn't get trained, it turns in, they can't even catch it, and you know, 6 months later, it's still walking around the field with a 12-foot lead hanging off of its halter so they can catch it, or try to catch it. So, but I think if you had, and you could do that with, you know, with the trainers, you could, maybe the prison programs, maybe which one of the prison, was it the one in Wyoming you said?
Right, the Wyoming Honor Farm in
Right,
Riverton,
so
Wyoming.
maybe a good function for that honor farm may be to be an assessment center for for horses that are going out to adoptions. So that these guys, they've got a skill set, there's a skill set there that they can evaluate horses, and maybe at the very least, if they're just going out halter trained out of there, and that those are the horses that go to adoption. So instead of an adoption showing up and they're shooting animals around, that you're now let out on a halter and a lead line. So, I mean, I just know, myself as a businessman, is when I present a product, I want to present the best product all the time. And if you know, the ads and stuff for that BLM puts out there really kind of tug at heartstrings, and they're basically promoting, you know, here, you know, find your life partner with your, you know, your horse life partner kind of ads, and they're very good ads. And I've had some Mustangs that are like that, but I've also ended up with a couple that, you know, one I ended up bringing out the Black Hills and setting loose because he was just too wild to be a safe horse. So, and I think that if you could avoid that recidivism pitfall, or at least really minimize that, it would be very easy to do simply by some kind of assessment of these horses before they go out for adoption. Would be another component that I think you guys ought to strongly consider.
Thanks.
You know, when talking about the other NGOs and stuff that are available, and I don't know that much about it, but I think it's the Heifer program, where people send money to put together so that they can either have, whether it's a heifer or a goat or any kind of an animal for a third world country that's needing that kind of an animal for production, that they use them and so forth. I think it might be somebody to visit with.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Sally.
Thank you.
Great work, by the way.
Okay.
Next will be Zach Reichold, discussing the eco sanctuary.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you all hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Zach.
All right, great. Well, I wish I had a little bit more to update y'all on. We made an attempt to get the group together. We just couldn't get our times so that they coincided with each other, and so I think we're going to look at probably working on one-on-one and talking about some of the ideas that they had following up from the last meeting on before we announce a new eco sanctuary proposal. not quite sure how sequestration will affect it or if it will affect it at all. But it is one thing that we're looking at moving forward with and attempting to do in the future. We still have are evaluating the eco sanctuary proposals from our last request that ended in September. It's taken a while longer than we've actually would have liked due to some of the questions revolving around the budget, the CR, and now that doesn't necessarily hamper the review process, but the evaluation and as far as travel funds to go out and look at the areas and potential funding streams, whether or not we can enter into new contracts or agreements, it has been a question that I think we have an answer on, but with every new financial looming cliff, it seems that we get a new set of questions to answer. With that said, I guess, are there any questions for me?
If I could just remind everyone, Zach Reichold is a senior specialist in Washington, D.C., where he's calling in from. The question, just a point he made that I want to add to, we did a RFP for more private eco sanctuaries, and we get some proposals in, but part of the process is, we evaluate them on paper and have a discussion, but then because of wanting to ensure that the facilities are appropriate and the humane care will be insured and all of that, we like to go visit the sites. So the effective sequestration on travel dollars, et cetera, that's one of the places it kind of comes in. So just an insight into the government budget balancing process and some of our challenges.
I don't know if I should direct this question to Joan or to you, Zach, that maybe you could update the public on just where we're at with the process with the public-private sanctuary proposal that has come in. I mean, just so everybody knows where that stands.
Okay, yeah. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold. With the public-private eco sanctuary, the contractors just met with the Elko district in order to start determining a plan and do the scoping. Well, the scoping report came out, and they're going to start doing the draft EIS and coming up and talking about the alternatives and potentially coming up with a proposed action. That is quite a lengthy process. Once that's complete, it'll go out again for public comment and public involvement. And so it's moving forward with the evaluation process and is on course as far as our timeline, but we're still not expecting anything to be out in print for quite some time, and then it will go out for the public scoping or the public comment process. And again, it really depends. NEPA is very dependent on the types of issues that are identified and concerns and the impact. So it's really hard to put a fixed end date to have a determination either for or against.
I think why the concern is that I think a number of the public wonder why this is a process that does take so long. It's been proposed for quite a while, and we're just seem to be midway through that process. So I think it's important that people realize that NEPA process takes time no matter what the action is on federal lands, and that it's a major portion of any planning process. So this is not taking any longer than any other proposed action would take, and frankly, it's a first. It's a new proposal of a new concept. So I think it's going to be looked at very closely, and that's just going to take time for that to evolve, and people shouldn't be expecting things happening too quickly. And that was my reason for asking.
Yeah, correct. There are a number of different laws and regulations that kind of get rolled up into the NEPA process that all need to be adhered to. And so the cultural survey that is going to be required, because there is a large cultural property that actually goes across the potential eco sanctuary, the proposed area, we are having to do extensive cultural surveys. There have been at least one endangered species, I believe, that has been identified to have habitat along there. So they're having to go into consultation with the Fish and Wildlife Service. So all of those are wrapped up in the NEPA process. And then a few other, the Clean Water Act and compliance with that. And then there's also, it's not just NEPA, there's also parallel reporting processes due to the square acreage of the potential public land that's involved and potentially reclassifying it. If it were to be reclassified, it could potentially require us to go to Congress and report to Congress and get approval for that. So there are a number of different things that are required that protect the public and their interest whenever we do any action, regardless of it's based on the potential impact, not necessarily on the type of the action.
Correct. Any other questions for Zach while we have him on the phone?
I do have a quick. Hi, Zach. This is Callie Hendrickson. Just a kind of a follow-up question from our last meeting. I'm seeing here that it was on the long-term holding pasture solicitation. We had asked how many applications there had been, and at that point you wasn't able to tell us. So I'm just wondering how many there were, and I'm assuming there have not been any of those awarded. Is that correct?
At this time, I believe that we have determined that we will go forward, and actually Carolyn could probably answer this a little bit better than I could, but to move forward with transferring horses to an Ennis, Montana location for a long-term holding facility that was awarded. Other than that, I don't believe that we were able to award any other agreements under that solicitation, any other contracts under that solicitation, although I do believe that we are going to continue to move forward and potentially request for other proposals for another contract. But it is very uncertain as to how many people and the quality of the applications that we receive. That's always the big thing, is it's not necessarily the quantity of the proposals that we receive, it's the quality. And so that really is where a better indicator is the quality, which I don't know how to, the qualitative thing, not a quantitative thing. So it's hard to sum up in words.
Zach, thank you. Carolyn is in the room, and I think she could add a little more, since those contracts are managed by the Reno office. There's more you could add to that, Carolyn?
Yeah, the proposal we had for the Ennis, Montana facility, which we were calling Spanish Q, we wrote the NEPA and analyzed placing horses on that. We received 5 appeals, to the Interior Board of Land Appeals. 1 appeal was dismissed. The other 4 appeals had requests for stay as part of the appeal. IBLA has 45 days to rule on a request for stay, and a request for stay would stay our action. After the 45 days, BLM is then, it's allowed for BLM to proceed with their proposed action. We went past the 45 days. IBLA did not rule on the request for stay, so last week we shipped, I believe, 6 loads of horses to Ennis. That went successfully. Our plan is between now and April 18th, we will populate that facility with 700 head. The estimated carrying capacity is 750. Of course, IBLA will still have a hearing on the merits of the appeals. Their schedule is fairly lengthy, so it will most likely be a year or better before they have a hearing and rule on the merits of the appeals. We felt that given the cost savings from short-term holding as opposed to long-term holding, that it was best for both financially and for the welfare of the animals to move them to Ennis, understanding that if we receive an unfavorable ruling, we could be required to bring the horses back. In the meantime, until the hearing, this will also be somewhat of a test to ensure that that facility is able to contain those horses and care for them properly, which would in effect moot most of the arguments in the appeals. So we've had a little interest from the local community and obviously from the appellants. But so far, things are going smoothly with placing horses at that facility.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I was just kind of curious, what are the, what are the appeals, what is the reason for the appeal? What are the problems that people are having with this facility being there?
The biggest concern with this facility was local neighbors were concerned about the condition of the fences and the owners of the facility's ability to contain the horses. The horses that we're placing there will be held for 2 months to become acclimated, so they'll basically be in a large feed ground. We have done inspection on those fences, and then obviously, as we do with all facilities, before horses are released into the grassland pastures, inspections will be done on all the fences to ensure that those animals will be contained. We've had some interest, and they didn't appeal it, but Rocky Mountain Elk had concern because that's some transitional elk range, but we do have strict utilization standards. We have 50% utilization on uplands and a 4% or 4-inch residual stubble height in riparian, and we'll monitor for that also to ensure that they're complying with their contractual obligation.
How many acres is that?
There is 15,000 acres.
Is it, and it's all, is it all private?
Yeah, there are some Forest Service and BLM inclusions, and part of the contract is those will have to be excluded from use by the horses, so there's probably some isolated 40s that will be fenced out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Callie, did you have something else you want to
No.
say?
You answered it, so thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And now, Dean. He's going to give us a update on the Wild Horse and Burro Gathers, Comprehensive Animal Welfare Program, and work at UC Davis with Dr. Catherine Holcomb.
Thank you, Boyd. I did get a little confused on the order of the agenda, but I am enthusiastic and anxious to report on our progress of our Comprehensive Animal Welfare Program, both to encapsulate and summarize what this program will be in the future, and also our progress on achieving the eventual goal of having a comprehensive animal welfare program for our entire wild horse and burro program. So, first, kind of a summary of what the vision of this program is. I envision a program that will be every bit as prominent as well-known aspects of our program, like the adoption program. In the beginning here, it's been a lot of storming and norming and how do we approach this and what should we do, and we've kind of been slow at it, but there's an old saying, you got to go slow before you go fast, and we're on the cusp of really beginning to get this thing developed, and we've gained the assistance of UC Davis and the assistance of Dr. Holcomb and Dr. Stahl at that institution. So what is a comprehensive animal welfare program? It is a program that establishes standards for the humane care and handling of wild horse and burros in every aspect of our program. That would include gathers, short-term holding, adoptions, transportation, and our on-the-range management of the animals. The biggest controversy and issue of interest has been capture of the animals and the care and handling of them there, even to the point that there has been some litigation associated with that. So as I reported last meeting and previous ones, we began to work on the gather part of the Comprehensive Animal Welfare Program first. Beyond, that's the first place we started. The basics of what a comprehensive animal welfare program are three things. Number one, standard operating procedures. What are the standards to which we're going to perform to? Number two, education and training for the people that handle and care for our animals. And number three, an auditing or an assessment program of our adherence to these standard operating procedures. Two elements of that audit process. Internal, where we can judge ourselves and review our performance, and then also an external audit part that would involve non-agency personnel, other animal welfare experts reviewing our adherence and conformance to the standard operating procedures. So that's an overview of what we envision the comprehensive animal welfare program to be. Where are we at today? What's our status? I reported last meeting that we had convened a BLM panel, and we had developed about 30 pages of standard operating procedures for the gather component of our program. There was questions, well, why aren't you implementing these? We have implemented a portion of them through an instruction memorandum that Joan referred to earlier, and that's in your books. There's 27 points that are managers' expectations as to how animals will be handled and cared for during capture operations. And also, I think there's a couple elements that deal with transportation. So that's the first step, and that's as much as we could implement under the existing gather contracts. Any further changes according to our contracting officer would be cardinal changes to the original contract and what they bid on and what they're being paid for. So we went as far as we could under the existing contracts. We will take let me go back a little bit. These 30-some pages that we shared with the subgroup last time have been turned over to UC Davis and Dr. Holcomb and Dr. Stahl, and they have refined and condensed and sharpened those standard operating procedures. And I shared that with the subgroup a few weeks ago. Got some comments from the board yesterday. That work's going to be turned back over to UC Davis. We will finalize those standard operating procedures for gathers. UC Davis will go to other external animal welfare entities and experts for further review of these to inform the final product of standard operating procedures for gathers. We will take those and implement them into new solicitations for gather contracts that will be hopefully in place come July, August, thereabouts. And then that will establish the benchmark for handling and care during capture. Dr. Holcomb is going to report further with us, and I'm hopeful that we can utilize UC Davis in the further development of our whole program, not just those on gathers. So I'm pleased and glad to introduce Dr. Holcomb from UC Davis, and she's going to talk more about what a comprehensive animal welfare program is and the work that she's been doing for BLM. So welcome, Dr. Holcomb.
Thank you, Dean, and thank you to the board for having me here. I'm very pleased to be here this morning. And as Dean said, I am just discussing the gather portion of what we've been working on, but it will be expanded to the entire range of care of the wild horses and burros. So first, let me see if my thing works here. Okay, first I'd like to give you some background on welfare assessment programs that are being used in animal livestock production and other areas. So during the last century, a great deal of concern arose about how animals were being treated. Pressure from animal activists, the general public, and ultimately consumers first turned their attention to animals in science and research, so product testing animals. And then they turned their attention to farm animals with the increasing intensity of production. A book came out in 1964 by a British author called Animal Machines. It was a scathing indictment of British animal production. It reached a very wide public audience, and the public demanded change. Within a year, the Bramble Commission was convened and came out with a report that said that animals should be able to get up, lie down, turn around, groom themselves, and stretch their limbs. From that developed the framework that's now universally known as the 5 Freedoms. So you'll often hear about the Bramble Report and the 5 Freedoms. These are the freedom from hunger and thirst, freedom from discomfort, freedom from pain, injury, or disease, freedom to express normal behavior, and freedom from fear and distress. These are not laws, they are not absolutes. There's disagreement about meaning and application. And if anyone wants to ask me about those, I could talk to you later about where the disagreements are. But it has given us a very sound framework for contemporary discussion of animal welfare. And almost all, if not all, welfare assessment programs are based on the 5 Freedoms. So what is animal welfare? You'll see a number of definitions. One of the simplest is it's how an animal is coping in its environment. We recognize 3 aspects of welfare: body, nature, and mind. Body is simply the physical health, what we're used to talking about mostly. Nature is literally the animal's nature, and we often talk about how would the species be in the wild. And then mind is the mental state of the animal. So there we're talking about fear, distress, motivation, preference. One of the first livestock issues that came under scrutiny by the public was slaughter and transport to slaughter. And the result was pressure from the public, activists and consumers, on big market chains, so the big fast food groups, to be accountable for the practices of their suppliers. So universities did research on what were the best welfare practices. The companies demanded that their producers started using these best practices, and they also developed audit systems to ensure that they were following them. Now, they're not perfect, I'll say that, but they're being implemented anyway. The components of welfare assessment programs are basically 3, and Dean alluded to them. Assessment of what's going on, education so that everybody involved has the same information, and feedback for improvement. The goal is that the public receives assurance that the best practices in humane animal care are being used, and consumers can have confidence. Drink of water here. So the assessment programs, I would say, are maybe not in their infancy, but maybe toddlerhood at this point. They're relatively new. They are a response by the industry to public concern. They haven't answered all the problems. There are still lots of critics. As I said, they're very new. It's a developing field. But they have expanded from slaughter and transport to all aspects of animal welfare, animal production, so meat animals, dairy animals, eggs, laying hens, and it's across the life cycle. Producers have to meet the standards of the organizations that are doing these welfare assessments. If they meet the standards, they get a certification, they get a label that they can put on their product, and that gives them a market advantage. There are many organizations doing this. Some are third party, some are industry groups. At this time, they're all voluntary. They have different standards. So some allow procedures that others don't allow, and consumers that are concerned about these issues need to do their research so they know what the product is, what that label stands for. What they do all have in common are standards. And that brings us to our topic today. The standards are generally categorized into engineering-based, also thought of as resource-based, and outcome-based. And I will describe these. Engineering-based standards are your facilities, equipment, resources. These are measurable. Some examples are the height of fences, the maintenance and safety of the vehicles that you use, and availability of feed and water. Here's an example from Humane Farm Animal Care Standards. This is for egg-laying hens. So this shows us a standard for the stocking density. It shows the minimum floor space allowance that hens should have. You don't need to read it in detail. Outcome-based standards look at the animals. They're directly observable. The issues you're looking at are generally a result of management practices. So some examples are body condition score, lacerations, and falls. So instead of inspecting a facility for surfaces that might have sharp edges or looking at the flooring to see if it's slippery, you look at the animals and look at the consequences of what those conditions are. Are the animals getting cut by something? Are they slipping and falling? And here's an example of an outcome-based standard. This is for beef cattle from American Humane Certified. This one's on vocalizations during handling. So cattle that are handled roughly in a squeeze chute will vocalize. Rather than trying to measure what is rough handling, you know, it's what's a little bit rough, what's a lot rough, you ask the cows. It's easier to count how many cows moo than it is to try to say what's rough. So this is an outcome-based standard. This one also shows, it's kind of a combination standard and audit tool. It does have the place for someone to check off yes, no, this whoever's being assessed here, whether they're compliant with the standard or not. So how are we going to use this for the wild horses and burros? We envision our welfare assessment program to be similar to the farm animal assessment programs. And this has grown out of demonstrated public concern for the welfare and care of the wild horses and burros. And it was a recommendation from the Independent Observer pilot program in 2010 that Dr. Stoll took part in. The purpose of the CAWP is to provide objective and regular assessment of the care and welfare of the wild horses and burros, to document and report any welfare-related activities internally and to the public, internally meaning BLM, to train employees on the humane care and handling welfare practices, and to provide data for ongoing evaluation of the program. The benefits of the program will be to establish expectations, so for everybody involved and everybody that's looking at the program, what are the expectations for handling and welfare? To collect data on activities at the gathers, so all data, things that go well as things, you know, mistakes, accidents, compromised handling. We want to collect things that go well too. To provide transparency, and again, to ensure consistent employee knowledge across the board, so everybody has the same information on humane care and handling. And then to document trends so we can look at issues for improvement. What it will not do is change the mission of the BLM. It will not change the purpose of gathers, the objectives of gathers, and it won't be able to answer every complaint, but it will address as many as possible. There are 3 components. Dean already talked about these. So we have standards, education, the assessment tool itself, and a byproduct of the assessment tool is a database. And we'll be going to look at each one of these. It's important to remember that this has been a collaborative process with UC Davis, with the BLM, and with external welfare experts. So first, looking at standards, you could think of these as the rules, what will and will not be allowed. As we've developed them, there are 3 components to them: the standards themselves, then a list of responsibilities of the contracting officer representative, the lead corps, and the incident commander. I'll go into detail in a minute. And then the required documentation by the lead corps and IC. So as I said, standards can be thought of as the rules. We cover 6 areas: facilities design, handling, capture technique, animal care, transportation, and euthanasia. All animal welfare assessment programs cover basically these same things, so the facilities, handling, care, transportation, and end of life. We've written the standards so that each one has a designation, so failing to fulfill a standard has a designation of either being a major deficiency or a minor deficiency. The major deficiencies directly impact the welfare of an animal, wild horse or burro. The wording that we've used in the standards include terms like must, prohibited, unacceptable. I'm going to give examples in a few minutes. Minor deficiencies could be things like a reporting deficiency or something that happens when there are variables that just can't be controlled. The terms used in those standards are may and should. As Dean already said, we took the standard operating procedures that a panel developed and refined them a great deal. A lot of what was in the standards were educational portions, so we'll put that into the training mode. But, so we were able to get it from 30 pages down to, I think it's 14, something like that. But they refined from that. And Dr. Stoll, in that 2010 project, she had also developed a proposed assessment tool. So we've combined the two and refined that. We've used both engineering and outcome-based standards in that. Some programs use one or the other, using both. So to give you some examples, an engineering-based major deficiency would be something like padding must be installed on the overhead bars of gates in narrow alleyways. So that would be something without the padding, a horse could hit its head and injure itself severely. Minor deficiency would be something like pens must be constructed to be oval, pens at trap sites and temporary facilities is what I mean. Oval or have rounded sides. It's best not to have right angles so that horses don't get cornered, but we recognize it's a minor, did I say the word should? If I didn't say should, it needs to be should. It's a minor deficiency because we recognize that there are situations where it might be difficult to get those rounded corners. The topography might be that you can only put the trap in a certain place. So we don't want to say must if there are issues that can't be controlled. Outcome example for a major deficiency, contractors must ensure that dependent foals are not abandoned or orphaned during the gather. A minor deficiency would be aggressive horses should be processed in a timely manner to minimize potential for injury. Again, that's a should, it's a minor, because there could be instances where it might be more dangerous to try to corral that aggressive horse than it is, it could be harder to get that horse out of the pen that it's in than to leave it where it is. So there are issues that just can't be controlled. We want to keep the safety of the other animals and the personnel in mind. So, okay. Throughout the standard operating procedures, throughout the standards, there are places where there are stipulations for the responsibilities of the lead corps and the IC. We've simply pulled those. We're not changing any of them. This does not in any way change the contractual obligation. We've simply pulled them into a single list so it's very clear what are the obligations. Some of the examples there are that the lead corps and IC will direct the gather using approved techniques, determine the rate of movement and the distance limitations. They will direct handling of any compromised wild horse and burro, or they will just direct any decisions about euthanasia. So again, we're not changing any of the obligations. We're just putting them in a list. From these, there are certain things that must be done, that must be documented, I mean. So any roping of any wild horse and burro must be documented. Any use of an electrical prod, any death or euthanasia, and any occurrence of any prohibited action or event. So this is part of the transparency. Things need to be documented. We don't want anybody to say, something happened, you didn't report it, okay? Now we'll look at the education component. We envision eventually an online training module. At first, I would at least pilot it in person with a group so that I can get feedback from people and be able to improve it. But we envision having a module that probably takes about an hour. There would be scenarios, information, hopefully use some videos showing proper and improper procedures. And then the people doing it, they'd read a section, look at some videos, and then there'd be a multiple choice question so they can demonstrate that they read it and understand it. I'm sure you've all taken these before. I take at least 2 a year, I think. The point is to ensure that everybody has the same knowledge. They're responsible for that knowledge, so on completion of this program, they would get a certificate. They would be responsible for knowing and using the knowledge appropriately. There would be periodic recertification, and of course any new employees would be taking this as well. So now we'll look at the assessment tool. It will again be based on those standards, engineering and outcome-based standards. There will be objective items, compliant and non-compliant. So similar to the example I showed you of the beef cattle assessment tool was yes, no, or not applicable. It's black and white. It's either compliant or not compliant. There'd be a place for comments, but it's either compliant or not compliant. We also envision this electronic. Eventually, we've talked to the people in the IT, and this is a doable thing. Might not be right away, but we envision like a touchscreen program. Right now, information at Gathers is taken on pen and paper, information such as description of the horses and so on. And then every night, that pen and paper, that written document has to be data entered into a computer. As you know, anytime you do double data entry, there's a chance for errors and omissions. So if we can go to something that's one entry, we think that would be a big improvement and save a lot of time. So the assessment would be done at every gather, every day by internal personnel. There would be a pre-gather assessment for the facilities. So where's the trap set up? How are are the fences appropriate? Where are the temporary holding facilities? Is the hay and water available? And those kind of things. Then there would be a daily assessment, more of the outcome-based standards, everything that goes on every day, and then an overall gather summary assessment. And there would be a periodic third-party audit, the frequency to be determined. I don't know, I haven't discussed that yet. And then, as I said, the assessment tool would produce a database, and this database, so it would feed directly to the database. Uses for the database would be internal review, allow us feedback and training and benchmarking. So once we can start collecting data and saying, this is what's going on out there now, we can look at our incidents. Are there things that are happening that are rare? If something just happens once versus something that, if we see a pattern, things that are happening that aren't good, we can look at the pattern and say, why is this happening? How can we correct it? Make some improvements. So that database will be invaluable in doing things like that. And possibly a source for reports to the public as well. The timeline, Dean's already talked about that. We've drafted the standards, and I guess I haven't received the comments yet, but I guess they're ready for me to look at, so we'll take them from there. Once they're approved, we can create the assessment tool, and we have started working on the training materials. So if you have any comments or suggestions, I would love to receive them. Here's my contact information. And other than that, I would be happy to answer questions.
At what point would this be available? This particular draft program that you're working on right now, would it be available to the public to have an idea of what these step-by-step procedures are?
That's probably a question Dean needs to answer.
I think once we get the feedback from further external animal welfare experts that Dr. Holcomb's going to coordinate on behalf of BLM, once that's done and they're ready to go into our gather contract, then that's considered public information. So right now we're in the throes of internally
Correct.
developing
I
this,
realize you
just
need a
about
final
to the
product.
end.
But at that point, it would become a public document that people could
Absolutely.
access and look at.
Transparency in our program, that's our theme and game for everything these days.
So that concurs with the July, August timeline that you're hoping to, is that what we're talking?
Yes, and maybe even prior to that
Maybe,
time.
yeah.
But
Yeah, I think it would be really, as soon as it's available to, ready for the public, I think it'd be great to get it out there so folks can see it.
we've
It's
had-
well thought out, you know, as, you know, I'm on the subcommittee to look at this thing, and I think it's well thought out and very, very well done, so. And the adjustments, as you know, were really, really, in our stuff that our input was very minor, because it was just so, the whole thing is so well done. So, yeah, you guys did a nice job.
Well, I indicated some enthusiasm about this, and I really mean that, because we've gotten, well, there's all kinds of public issues and concerns, site-specific things. We've had a letter from the Humane Society addressing a number of topics that they thought was important. We have a report from the American Association of Equine Practitioners. Dr. Holcomb mentioned an original program that Dr. Stahl was involved in that the American Horse Protection Association offered to us. They went and attended 3 gathers. All of the issues that have came up in this, I'm confident, are being addressed in a clear manner, and I really feel good about finally what has settled out. And
Well,
we got a vision here, and it's going to happen, and I think the public concerns are going to be addressed effectively.
Well, that's the reason why I'm also feel pretty enthusiastic about seeing it get to the public, because in reviewing the draft, I felt that of all the complaints that I received, that, you know, people writing to me about things that are going on at the gathers, I didn't see one single issue that's been brought to my attention that's not addressed in the SOPs. So that was really nice to see. You know, and I also like the external process, so that it's being generated from outside of the BLM, so that there, you know, a lot of it is so that there's no question, that there's no, that the primary concern is the horses, and which I think the BLM does have forefront, but I think also having it, the outside influence helps to reinforce that.
We recognize we don't have the expertise to handle this internally, and
Yeah.
that's what UC Davis said. Further, they'll go outside.
Our mantra at UC Davis, at least in the welfare program, is that the animal comes first. Yes.
Thank you, because from what I have seen of that as well, it's very well done, and I really do appreciate that. And I really appreciate the review by the scientific community and so forth, and that it's really focused on the scientific piece of it. So thank you for keeping it that way.
You're welcome.
Dean, do you want to mention, you need 2 chairs there, I think, but do you want to mention the parallel process we're doing about this relative to the gather contracts?
Relative to the gather contracts, Joan, I mentioned that we were going to issue new contracts to incorporate all of these. Is that what you were pointing to? Yeah. So, yeah, we're going to go there, and I mentioned the timeline for that is July or August. We're also going to proceed, and I didn't mention a timeline, and I'm hesitant to do that, but for the standard operating procedures for the other elements of our program, the gather part contains a lot of things that cross into the other program components. And we have a goal to have those developed by the end of the year, October, the end of the fiscal year. And then we can proceed with the educational components. But we've got the heavy lifting done now, because there's a lot of commonalities between capture, the transportation element, for example. That's a cross-section throughout all. So we've got a lot of progress that's going to, I mentioned we had to go slow to go fast. We're going to start going fast at this point.
Well, this is the most difficult one, and probably the most scrutinized by the public. So I see, you know, having this one, you know, if you get this one nailed down, I think it's going to be a lot easier to go through the rest of the, you know, the facilities, because you already have a number of, everything from facility, you know, set up and padding and all those sorts of things will carry over into almost every other aspect of it. So, questions? Everybody's happy? Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Holcomb. Dean? Okay, we're ahead of schedule. That's a tough thing to do.
If we're ahead of schedule, can I address go back a little bit? Just address something with Sally on the adoption thing real quick. I had, if you, is that okay? Yeah, she's in the room. Yeah, is that okay, Dean? Boyd?
Go ahead.
Okay. Hey, one of the things that you were talking about setting up, you know, getting more adoption stuff out there and more opportunities. One of the things I just wanted to let you know, and we can talk and visit on this later on, but Tom C., who has the TV program Best of America by Horseback, is a friend of mine, and I was just talking to him a couple days ago, and he asked me if it would be possible to do one of his shows and centering on the Mustang and work with, so it's something that I want to get together with you, and I was sitting here jotting notes down, and you know how I know at times I can be a little challenging to be around for yourself because my mind runs so quick on things, but you know, one of the things that might be an opportunity, and I don't know if I'm putting Patty on the spot here on doing this, but you know, maybe a combined event with the Mustang Heritage Foundation and Tom C., his show is a #1 watch show on, what's that network, the RFD network? But, you know, doing it's like in the venue of the Extreme Mustang Makeover, perhaps the ultimate trail horse, and do something that would be all with Mustangs. And it might be something, it's really, I think it's probably one of the most appropriate uses of these horses is as trail horses. So there's a really, really good opportunity there. So I can put together some contact stuff for you with Tom and get that squared away. All right?
One thing that perhaps we could do is, I know we ran through Joan's update rather rapidly. And, you know, we were kind of flipping through holding facilities and gathers and everything else, you know, on a timely basis. But I think it might be a good chance to use this few moments to back up and does anybody have any questions on everything from the gather schedule that was just completed and the fact that we can't look toward any summer gather potential because of funding and budget considerations. But do you have anything else that you needed to expand on before we ask any questions on any of those items? On gathers, on budget, or anything else? At the end of your update, we had to kind of skim through stuff kind of fast.
Right. Well, I'll invite Dean or Carolyn to elaborate on this if they want to. But you know, right now the funding and the space issues allow us to say that animals that are in their own health concerns, public nuisance, or public safety emergencies are the top criteria by which we will decide what can be taken off. Because of those reasons. There's a lot of other reasons we want to be able to remove and treat animals on the range, but because of the drought and the fires, because of the money, and because of the space issues, we collectively, and this isn't just within our program, there's managers who are now consulting with us intentionally in other programs. This is kind of the corporate view of the Wild Horse and Burro thing. It's not just state by state by state, kind of separate. It's really one thing. So that's kind of where we have come to out of necessity. Is there anything, Dean, you would want to add to that?
I would add that it points at the urgency for population growth suppression on the range and to reduce the need to remove animals and bring their numbers in line with the capacity of the land, and especially so in the drought conditions that we pretty much have throughout the West. And that's not a new topic, a new thought for anybody, but because of the constraints we have that Joan mentioned, there's urgency in doing things to manage their growth beyond removal and gathers.
Dean, I don't know if it's somewhat unfair, but I'm going to ask you anyway, because you're enthusiastic. But no, I mean, I think maybe, you know, it would be, if you could mention some of the change in the gather schedule that was brought about because of range conditions, body condition on horses and that sort of thing. And, you know, maybe just mention the ones that were set back because of that, and which ones were brought forward, you know, because of those health concerns for the horses.
Okay, I'll go to the tab in your book that is for the on the range management, number 5, which is the gather schedule. I can't specifically indicate to you, Boyd, which gathers fell off the schedule. But initially, and even before fiscal year 13 began, we had a gather schedule that had HMAs on it that are not here as being completed, that were in the recommendations of the states needed consideration for gathering. As we approached fiscal year 2013, late in 2012, there were fires in several HMAs, and there were several HMAs that were discovered that had no water, in the case of one in Oregon. Those HMAs were not on the schedule, and it was an emergency for the well-being of the animals. In the case of one HMA in Oregon, Jackie's Butte, about 90% of it burned over. There was no forage for anything out there. That became an emergency gather that was an unplanned thing. In the Paisley HMA in Oregon, there were animals discovered walking a fence line, and the field office already knew that there was limited water there, and they were monitoring it, but we reached a point of no return. There was one reservoir with minor water in it. A neighbor, a rancher, let some animals into his alfalfa field to get water, and within a week we had a gather crew out there, and our goal was to capture every single animal that was in the HMA. That was largely achieved. Some are being held in the Burns Corral for potential and eventual release back into the HMA. But my point is, with the drought and the overpopulations in some areas comparative to the capacity of the range to support them, we've had to change the gather schedule. So Joan organized or asked me to lead a team of field folks that went to a number of HMAs to assess conditions, because we had requests from the field to conduct gathers beyond which we had space for and funding. So the gather schedule that you see in the book that has been completed, it changed dramatically based on our findings in the field and our determinations that this one is the place where the animals are highest at risk comparative to others, and where range conditions are most lacking in the amount of forage or water available. It's not to say that there aren't HMAs there and out there that we have not gathered that should be. I'll give you another example. The Twin Peaks HMA, about 40% of it burned. And it's a large HMA. I don't remember the exact acreage, maybe 450,000 acres approximately. 40% of it burned. That leaves a lot of acreage remaining, one would think, on the surface. But when you take a close look at it, the entire mountain, the best habitat that these horses frequent and use for their summer range and even partly winter range, the forage is pretty much burned over. There's mosaic of unburned areas there, but it's not adequate for proper management of the horses, for re-establishment and rehabilitation of the burned area to allow for those grasses to recover, and it is some prime sage-grouse habitat, some of the best in Northern California. We were not able to, and as what Joan reported to, we may not be able to go there. We may have animals that get in trouble because we're not able to be out there. So,
I was kind of referring back to, on one of your announcements in December, early December, you put out a press announcement, talking about those ones that were pulled back, like the Mavericks, Medicines, and Snowstorms. I think it's Hickory, is that the pronunciation on the Forest Service there, on that territory? Those were pulled back in order to take care of horses that are in bad condition in the diamonds, for example, and that sort of thing. So I know that that's a kind of a local interest, to people in each one of those areas for various, reasons of their interest. But that's, I wanted to make public that process that you went through to change your priorities and gather.
I'll give you another example, the Wassuck HMA in Nevada near Carson, managed out of the Carson City office. The initial plan was to remove down near, but not even to the high end of AML. But as the animals begin to come in, there was quick recognition that their body condition is really not very good. And there was already awareness that there wasn't very much forage out there, but our monitoring of the animals, seeing them close up, the quick determination that things are a lot more not very good than originally assessed. So revisit the gather schedule again. The numbers that were removed from there were upped, and there's still animals on the range there, but things aren't very good there right now for those that are there. But we've continually adjusted the primary aim to direct removals to those areas where animals are most imperiled or soon will be, with limitations of range condition and water availability.
I think the fear is that looking forward, you know, in Nevada especially, there's a real disparity between southern and probably western Nevada is still definitely in a drought. Whereas in the Wasatch area you're talking about, you know, so you're pulling horses, needed to pull, you know, you did pull horses off in an increased manner in an area that is still in drought, and they got to that condition because it's already had a lot of drought. But then in the Diamonds, where you had similar situation with horse body condition, you had a drought going into a very tough winter. You've had a lot of snow down there and a lot of weeks of sub-zero temperatures, and that's tough on any animal, you know, no matter what we're looking at. So wildlife, domestic animals, and wild horses all suffered a lot in that situation. And so, you know, I was glad to see that you pushed forward with those ones that were in a critical situation.
Another example and a final example, to continue the discussion a little bit. In Nevada, there was the Oahe complex, and then right across the river was the little snowstorms. And it was the team that reviewed these areas late in fiscal 12, or I think, yeah, we were there in October, November. I can't remember exactly, but it was determined that really the whole area should be gathered. Your operation is there, and a large overpopulation in the snowstorms, animals going outside the HMA, a mining company pumping water, providing it to them. But those animals weren't in near as much predicament as those in the Little Oahe and the Oahe area. So we didn't gather the little snowstorms. We certainly should have, but we didn't. In the Little Oahe, there's a tremendous amount of acreage there. It's a huge area, but we had hundreds of animals watering at one water source. And I reported to you last time, we were at a spring with a couple of water troughs, and I've never seen anything like this before in my outdoor experiences, but we had a group of antelope that came right in and approached the water trough that I was standing by, along with a videographer and a wild horse specialist, from that projector to me. And I've never seen, it was motivated by their thirst and their need to drink, and the horses and no cattle out there and the antelope were all sharing the same water source. The specialist report the antelope didn't come in when the horses were there. There wasn't very much water, but a whole lot of thirsty animals trying to get a drink. So there is no exaggeration when the field has been reporting short water sources, because it certainly was there in that situation, and we have gathered in that area now. And we continue to monitor. We publish a weekly report that we call Escalating Conditions, and there are many, many, many HMAs that are on the watch list and continue to be there. We're trying to stay on top of this as much as we can.
We appreciate that, Dean. Any questions or comments from others on the board? If not,
Do we have time for minutes? Do we still have a couple minutes?
yes, we do.
Okay. I guess, and I'm not sure, just because we do have extra time, one of the questions that I had, the catch, treat, and release in the situations where we've got horses that were, or herds, that if you're being able to release some horses and actually treat mares and so forth, have we been doing that long enough that we see any challenges with increased difficulty in gathering those horses. So in other words, they get accustomed to the helicopters and the ways that we're gathering them so that it becomes more challenging to gather them the next time we need to.
Well, our field people commonly report that. The contractors experience it. In my field experience, I experienced it. The Kiger Mustangs, a little herd in Oregon out of the Burns district, they became kind of difficult to capture. They understand what it means when the helicopter comes. That herd has been intensively managed, and the animals were often returned to the range. Quite a few of them had freeze marks on them because we wanted to keep track of them. And yes, when they're repeatedly captured, they do become accustomed and knows what's going on, and you can't use the same old trap site. You need to be really innovative, but they are more difficult to capture, and it takes more effort, sometimes more close flying by the helicopter to herd and direct them into the wings of the trap to accomplish the capture. So yes, it's a factor, and there are concerns. If we were to do a fertility control program with the existing longevity efficacy of PZP, we'd have to capture every 1 to 2 years. And Jeff Manning is going to report on some recent results of the efficacy of PZP 22. But in order to accomplish frequent application of fertility control vaccine to mares, yes, you're going to have to gather frequently. And that is not easily accomplished, in part because the animals become more wary and more difficult to capture. But in addition to that, we have 179 HMAs, and we manage 30-some million acres that have horses in them, a tremendous expanse of land. That tool in itself is one that we need to have in our bag and use appropriately. But we need other population growth suppression tools. We can't go to 179 HMAs and have helicopter gathers of those animals on an annual or biannual basis. And they're not approachable enough in many areas to dart and use the 1-year PZB vaccine that's very effective.
Okay, so just kind of a follow-up question to that, and because I know there are some of them that they're being able to do darting and so forth. And most of those are in areas where you've got local groups that are working closely with BLM to do that, that are successful. Do we have an idea then of the 179 HMAs? Do we have an idea of the number of HMAs that have, for lack of a better term, friends of that HMA? So that volunteer groups that are helping them. Do we know, is it even 10% of those that we've got small groups helping with?
I think we probably need do a little more research because I know the field offices continue to work on that, but I do know of 4 HMAs that have local groups that help, those being the Pryors, I think Little Spring Creek, Little Book Cliffs, and McCullough Peaks is the ones that come to my mind. You mentioned a key to success there is the help of our partners and volunteers. That's certainly true, but I would add that in order to dart and apply the 1-year PZV vaccine, other factors that are important are the approachability of the animals and that the HMAs are smaller without large populations. That's also important to accomplish that. Are there more than those 4 that we could do this? Perhaps, but probably not
Limited.
too many.
Okay, thank you, appreciate that.
You're welcome.
2 quick things. Remember, please, that if you want to participate in the public comment period, the sign-up sheet is in back. It will close at 2 o'clock. And we would very much like to have everybody seated and ready to start at 1 o'clock because we've got a big agenda this afternoon. So.